Under the brilliant spotlights of the entertainment industry, where every image is polished to the point of perfection, the death of Yu Menglong emerged like a cold fissure, dragging behind it an unprecedented and heavy silence. This was not merely the passing of a young artist, but a moment that stretched the emotions of fans and the public to their absolute limits, like fragile threads waiting for a single minor impact to snap completely. From that moment, the gaze of society began to turn more vigilant, directed not only toward Yu Menglong himself but toward the entire environment that surrounded and shaped his life. The question appeared almost instantaneously, yet no one dared to give it a name. Was that death merely the starting point of a hollow nightmare, where a person could be stripped of both their breath and their identity, only to become soulless shadows amidst a magnificent city? When a human being vanishes without leaving a full explanation, it is that very silence that causes unease to proliferate. In this context, an unexpected image appeared in Shanghai, not in investigative reports or obituary lines, but within a luxurious commercial space. In the middle of a vast hall, a dark-toned advertisement was solemnly hung, surrounded by dozens of long coats suspended in midair. There were no bodies, no faces, only hollow layers of fabric, hanging at different heights, creating a sensation that was both alien and haunting. Many who entered that space were unable to name their emotions. It was not exactly fear, nor was it simple curiosity, but a vague sense of unease, as if they were standing before something that exceeded the boundaries of conventional display art. The timing of that image made it impossible for the public to ignore. While the name Yu Menglong was still pervasive in discussions, and while questions regarding what had happened to him remained without satisfactory answers, these dehumanizing symbols were immediately placed under a lens of suspicion. For some, it was merely a bold visual concept. For others, it evoked emptiness, the transformation of humans into silhouettes or tools, or even their erasure from their own stories. Notably, this narrative does not seek to provide a hasty conclusion. It does not affirm nor does it deny. Instead, it poses a smoldering, lingering question that forces people to stop and think. When an artist departs in such a terrifying silence, what was truly buried with him? Was it merely an individual fate, or a part of a truth that the system was never ready to face? And from that starting point, this story begins the journey of peeling back each surface layer, not to search for a culprit, but to understand what made the silence so heavy. After the initial moment of shock, what remained most clearly in the public mind was not a concrete truth, but a void. This void lay not only in information, but in emotion, in perception, and in the way society began to look back at what was once considered normal. The death of Yu Menglong did not close his story. On the contrary, it opened a prolonged state of instability, where every image and every detail that appeared afterward became abnormally sensitive. In the days and weeks that followed, fans did not just seek new news, they sought consistency. They attempted to rearrange their memories of a person who was once very clearly present, who had laughed, talked, and appeared before the camera with very real emotions. When a story is cut short without an ending, the human mind is forced to create its own connections to fill the gaps. This is not a deliberate deduction, but a natural reflex of the collective psychology in the face of an unexplained loss. It was within this fragile state of mind that the image of the floating coats in the Shanghai commercial space appeared. If detached from the context, it might have been merely an abstract visual idea, a bold aesthetic experiment. But when placed at that specific time, while the name Yu Menglong still cast a shadow over discussions, that image immediately took on a different meaning. It was no longer an inanimate object, it became a symbol that triggered emotion. Coats without bodies inside evoke a sense of absence, but not an abstract absence. It is the absence of a specific human being, with a name, a face, and a story. In the public memory, Yu Menglong was not a vague concept. He was an individual who was once vibrantly present. When the image of that human being was replaced by hollow forms, the contrast became too stark to be ignored. It is important to emphasize that there is no evidence suggesting these images were created with any intent directly related to Yu Menglong. However, the core issue does not lie in the original intent, but in how the system reacted to public sensitivity. In a tense mental atmosphere, allowing dehumanizing symbols to persist without timely adjustment or explanation, unintentionally reinforced the feeling that human emotions were not the top priority. From here, the story began to shift away from the visual surface and move deeper into the layer of social psychology. The death of Yu Menglong was no longer viewed as an isolated personal incident. It was gradually placed into a chain of fragmented yet haunting signs, causing many to wonder whether cold and invisible operational mechanisms existed behind the aura of the entertainment industry. When an artist disappears, what is truly buried with him? Was it just a personal fate, or a part of a truth that has never been told? This unease appeared not only within the loyal fan community. Even audiences outside the entertainment industry felt a discord that was difficult to name. They did not necessarily believe in extreme hypotheses, but they recognized something familiar: the feeling that within large systems, humans can be reduced to roles or images, and then replaced when they are no longer suitable. In that context, Yu Menglong became a representative case, not because of his level of fame, but because of how his departure exposed questions that society has grown accustomed to avoiding. At an analytical level, it is necessary to separate symbol from reality. The hanging coats are not evidence of anything, but they functioned as a mirror reflecting the mental state of society at that time. When people are searching for meaning in an incomplete story, every symbol can become a catalyst. And when silence is prolonged, the collective imagination automatically fills it with the deepest of fears. Therefore, the root of the uneasy emotion did not lie in a specific image, but in the information gap and the lack of dialogue. Silence, in this case, was not neutral. It became an active factor shaping public emotion. In the absence of a clear explanation, every detail could be interpreted as a hidden signal, whether or not it truly carried that meaning. Yu Menglong, throughout this entire phase, had no voice. He was no longer there to confirm or deny anything. It was that absolute silence that made him the center of every interpretation. And from this starting point, the story began to slide away from external symbols, preparing to enter another layer where the public would not just look at images, but begin to scrutinize the signs of his life, the small changes in his behavior and emotions before the incident occurred. As the symbolic images gradually subsided, public attention began to shift toward more intimate, specific details directly linked to Yu Menglong's personal life. No longer about alien display spaces or abstract visual metaphors, the story now revolved around small, seemingly trivial pieces that held special weight in the memory of fans. It was at this level that collective emotion began to polarize clearly. Among the most frequently mentioned details, images of the dogs Yu Menglong once owned became the focal point of a prolonged wave of debate. Previously, they appeared as a familiar part of his lifestyle posts, representing a very private and soft corner of his soul. Those photos once created a sense of peace, evoking the image of a person with a simple inner life, somewhat detached from the pressures of the stage. However, when the public began to cross-reference timelines and compare old and new images, the consistency seemed no longer intact. Very small differences, almost unnoticeable at a glance, became clear when placed together in a suspicious context. The gaze, the appearance, and the level of connection in the photos left many people feeling bewildered. Some argued it was merely a natural change over time, or due to lighting conditions and camera angles. But for those who had followed Yu Menglong for a long time, the sense of familiarity seemed to have vanished. What made the debate intense was not the matter of right or wrong, but the timing of these details, which coincided with the period he began to show clear signs of stress. Simultaneously, Yu Menglong's live streams during this period were also recalled with a cautious tone. There were no direct statements, no accusations, or specific allusions. There were only prolonged silences, gazes that lingered too long on the lens, and short sentences that were apologetic but lacked explanation. To an outsider, these might have been merely signs of fatigue. But for those searching for clues, each of those moments was interpreted as a tightly compressed cry for help. It is noteworthy that Yu Menglong never publicly pointed to any individual or organization. His silence was absolute, and it was that very silence that made every interpretation more complex. In an environment where public utterances are always carefully weighed, saying nothing is sometimes seen as the only safe choice. However, looking back from behind, the public could not avoid the question of whether that safety was traded for prolonged psychological pressure. From this point, public opinion quickly divided into two distinct streams. One side called for sobriety, emphasizing that unverified details should not be turned into accusatory conclusions. They argued that connecting disconnected events could lead to misunderstandings and even cause harm to uninvolved people. For them, Yu Menglong's silence did not necessarily carry a negative meaning, and every speculation needed to be placed within the limits of social responsibility. The other side, while not affirming any specific hypothesis, believed the coincidences repeated too many times to be ignored. They were not looking for a clear culprit. What they sought was an explanation that could help them understand why a person who was once vibrantly present gradually became closed off, distant, and finally disappeared into silence. To them, Yu Menglong's story was not an isolated incident, but a reminder that not all pressure can be seen with the naked eye. Between these two streams of opinion, the image of Yu Menglong gradually moved away from the framework of an ordinary entertainer. He was no longer just mentioned through roles or projects, but through a mental state and the limits a human being can endure. The public began to ask questions not only about what happened, but about how the entertainment industry reacts when an individual falls into a vulnerable state. Who is responsible for monitoring, supporting, and intervening when pressure exceeds an artist's capacity for self-balance? At this stage, the story began to shift direction. Suspicions no longer stopped at the level of personal emotion, but began to point toward the structure behind it. If Yu Menglong was indeed in a state of being controlled or restricted in his ability to express himself, then it was not just his problem. It reflected a broader model where images, contracts, and economic interests could override basic human needs for mental safety. The question was raised not to find a simple answer, but to open a larger space for dialogue. In an industry where aura and pressure always coexist, where is the boundary between management and control? And when that boundary is blurred, who possesses enough power to speak for those who can no longer protect themselves? Yu Menglong, though no longer there, inadvertently became the center of these questions, pushing the story to a more intense level, preparing to touch the very essence of the system he was once a part of. As the story moved beyond the boundaries of individual suspicions, a broader contextual layer began to emerge. The circumstances surrounding Yu Menglong were no longer viewed as disconnected events, but as intersections within a complex web of power, where economic interests, image control, and strategic silence were tightly intertwined. It was here that public attention shifted from the question of what happened to the question of who holds the power of decision. In the modern entertainment industry, an artist's image rarely belongs to them alone. It is shaped, managed, and exploited by multiple layers, from management companies and commercial partners to long-term communication strategies. On the surface, it is a rational system designed to optimize efficiency and protect the brand. But at a deeper level, the line between protection and control becomes thin. When decision-making power is concentrated in a few entities, the individual voice is easily blurred, especially during sensitive periods. Circulating information about certain fluctuations within the industry, though not directly related and not fully verifiable, contributed to highlighting a sense of systemic instability. Restructuring, financial pressure, fierce competition, and the requirement to maintain a stable public image create an environment where mental risk is often pushed to a secondary concern. In this context, artists are no longer viewed purely as creative subjects, but are gradually seen as links in an economic value chain. Yu Menglong, when placed into this picture, emerges as an individual standing at a fragile intersection between humanity and the mechanism. He was not the only one under pressure, but his story became extraordinary because of the timing and the way it ended. When a system faces major challenges, the links that do not hold decision-making power are usually the ones most directly impacted. Public unease, therefore, did not stem from believing in a specific scenario, but from the realization that mental risks could be downplayed in the process of maintaining surface stability. At an analytical level, it cannot be affirmed that Yu Menglong's story was the result of a conspiracy or a deliberate decision. However, it also cannot be denied that a lack of transparency, prolonged silence, and the way the system reacted to warning signs contributed to creating a vulnerable environment. When multiple pieces of instability coexist, the possibility of tragedy is no longer hard to imagine. What made the climax of awareness clearer was the opposition in public perception. On one hand, they witnessed the aura being maintained, commercial activities continuing, and the operational machinery seemingly not slowing down. On the other hand, they faced the permanent absence of a human being, alongside a series of unanswered questions. That opposition did not aim to affirm right or wrong, but exposed an emotional gap, where personal pain and systemic interests seemed not to meet. It was at this point that Yu Menglong was gradually perceived not just as an artist who had passed away, but as a symbol for the unacknowledged limits of the entertainment industry. His story forced society to face the reality that aura does not always come with commensurate protection. Behind the brilliant stages, there can exist shadows that have never been illuminated, where pressure accumulates and there is not enough space for timely support. The climax of this analysis does not lie in a shocking discovery, but in a shift in perspective. The public began to realize that seeking a single answer might no longer be the focus. Instead, the more important question is what the system will learn from this silence and loss. Who holds responsibility when an individual falls into crisis in an environment designed to optimize image and profit? And whether current mechanisms have enough capacity to recognize, intervene, and protect humans before everything exceeds the limit. From here, the story reached a stop in terms of awareness. It was not a closure, but a necessary lull. Yu Menglong was no longer there to demand answers, but his absence was enough to force society to look back at how it consumes images, how it remains silent before fragile signs, and what position it places human beings in within a massive operational system. It was in this lull that the story prepared to move toward its conclusion, where questions no longer aimed to seek absolute truth, but to redefine the values and responsibilities of all those standing inside and outside the lights. Under all the layers of analysis, debate, and speculation, the most glaring remaining reality is the void that Yu Menglong left behind. It is not just the void of an artist no longer present. It is a void in public trust toward a system once considered glamorous, rigorous, and controlled down to every detail. When a person departs without carrying a full explanation, that silence itself becomes a message, forcing society to stop and reflect. Time may soothe the surface noise, but the questions hanging around the name Yu Menglong seem never to have truly settled. They no longer bear the appearance of a momentary shocking incident, but have gradually become a smoldering fissure in the collective consciousness. That fissure serves as a reminder of how fragile the boundary between a brilliant star and a vulnerable human being can be, especially in environments where image is placed above the individual voice. This story does not leave behind a clear verdict, nor does it grant the public a comfortable conclusion. Instead, it poses an unavoidable question. What are we truly seeing when we follow familiar faces on the screen? Are they flesh and blood humans, with limits and the need for protection, or merely products molded perfectly enough to serve the gears of interest? When the human part is dissolved into the image, silence is no longer a personal choice, but can become the consequence of a cold operational mechanism. The passing of Yu Menglong in that context is more of a wake-up call than a condemnation. It reminds us that aura can hide a great deal of darkness, and surface success has never been an absolute shield for inner mental safety. Not all pressure can be measured, and not all trauma leaves a clear trace until it is too late. Perhaps over time, this story will gradually drift into the gray zone of collective memory. Perhaps, one day, the missing pieces will be illuminated under a fuller light. But whatever the outcome, that silence and loss have already opened a necessary dialogue about responsibility, about the limits of power, and about the value of humans within massive operational systems. In a world where everything is managed, measured, and optimized, what happens when silence is the loudest voice? And will the loss of Yu Menglong be enough to force those indifferent gears to slow down, to look directly into the voids they create before another absence appears? That question is not just for the entertainment industry, but for all who stand before the choice between efficiency and humanity, between the image and the real person behind the lights.